It wasn't a sudden speculative frenzy. It wasn't a geopolitical glitch. It wasn't even a temporary supply chain disruption. It was the breaking point of a mathematical inevitability. The sudden vertical move in silver prices is not about the metal itself. It is a verdict on the currency used to price it. When a boring, industrial asset suddenly wakes up, when it rips higher in days, not years, it signals that the smart money has stopped trusting the denominator. The pattern is unmistakable. The arithmetic is merciless. History shows us that when the trust in sovereign debt fractures, the flight to safety does not happen in a straight line. It happens all at once. This is not a market anomaly. It is the resumption of a historical cycle that has destroyed empires for 2,000 years. We are watching the mechanics of a currency rejection event. The data is clear. The incentives are aligned. And the timeline is accelerating. To understand why silver is moving now, and why triple digits are not just possible, but mathematically probable, we must look at 3 specific moments in history where the exact same dynamic played out. The names change. The technology changes. But the human reaction to currency debasement remains constant. First, consider the Roman Empire. Specifically, the period between the reign of Nero in 54 AD and the crisis of the 3rd century. Rome had conquered the known world, but the costs of maintaining the legions, the bureaucracy, and the public dole became unsustainable. The state reached a hard limit on taxation. To tax the citizens further would risk revolt. So, the emperors chose the only remaining option. They debased the currency. The silver denarius, the reserve currency of the ancient world, was slowly stripped of its purity. Under Nero, the silver content was reduced to 90%. By the time of Marcus Aurelius, it was 75%. By the mid-3rd century, under Gallienus, the coin was merely bronze dipped in a thin wash of silver. It contained less than 5% precious metal. The result was catastrophic inflation. Prices for wheat and labor skyrocketed. But the most telling signal was the behavior of the soldiers. The Roman legionnaire, the backbone of the empire, refused to be paid in the new, debased coinage. They demanded payment in physical goods, land, or pure bullion. They understood intuitively that the state's promise was worthless. The flight to hard assets was the only way to survive the collapse of the imperial fiat, just like the Roman legionnaires rejected the debased denarius. The citizens of Weimar Germany in the early 20th century faced a more accelerated version of this nightmare. Following the devastation of the First World War, the German state was burdened with impossible reparations payments, dictated by the Treaty of Versailles. The industrial output of the nation had been shattered, and the government lacked the tax revenue to meet its obligations. The incentive structure made the decision inevitable. The Reichsbank began to print marks to buy foreign currency and pay striking workers in the occupied Ruhr Valley. By 1923, the velocity of money, the speed at which currency changes hands, reached terminal velocity. The printing presses ran 24 hours a day, yet they could not keep up with the depreciation. A single loaf of bread that cost 250 marks in January 1923 cost 200 billion marks by November. But the crucial detail often missed in history books is the behavior of the middle class during the onset of the crisis. Before the final collapse, there was a specific phase known as the flight to real values. Germans realized that holding paper money for even an hour was a guaranteed loss. They rushed to exchange currency for anything tangible. It started with gold and silver, but as those vanished from circulation, the panic spread to pianos, machinery, and land. The store clerk and the university professor alike found themselves frantically trading millions of marks for a silver spoon or a bag of coal. Those who held physical silver preserved their purchasing power entirely, while those who trusted the state's paper were wiped out completely, just like the Weimar collapse. The decline of the British Empire in the 20th century offers a stark warning about the loss of reserve currency status. Britain entered the 20th century as the world's creditor, with the pound sterling serving as the globe's trusted standard. However, the costs of 2 world wars and the establishment of a massive welfare state drained the national treasury. By the post-war era, Britain was drowning in debt. The government attempted to maintain the pound's value through capital controls and promises, but the economic reality was undeniable. The crisis culminated in 1967 and continued through the 1970s. Prime Minister Harold Wilson famously devalued the pound, assuring the public that the pound in your pocket had not lost its value. This was technically true in nominal terms, but functionally a lie. Import prices surged and inflation eroded the savings of the British public. By 1976, the situation was so dire that the United Kingdom, once the master of the globe, had to go hat in hand to the IMF for a bailout. During this decade of decline, the price of silver and gold rallied significantly against the pound. The British saver who kept their wealth in sterling saw a slow, grinding expropriation of their labour, while those who positioned themselves in hard commodities protected their families. From the state's mismanagement, the pattern repeats in 7 distinct stages. Stage 1 is the era of sound money, where currency is backed by hard assets and the economy grows through production and savings. Stage 2 is the expansion of the state, where social programs and military adventures increase government spending beyond tax receipts. Stage 3 is the turning point. The government, unwilling to cut spending or raise taxes, begins to debase the currency to cover the deficit. Stage 4 is the onset of inflation, which the authorities initially dismiss as temporary or necessary. Stage 5 is the era of denial, where the government implements price controls, capital controls, and propaganda to hide the loss of purchasing power. Stage 6 is the flight to assets, where the public loses faith and aggressively dumps currency for physical goods, causing a rapid spike in prices. Stage 7 is the final reset, where the old currency is abandoned and a new system is established, often wiping out paper wealth in the process, just like the flight to assets in Stage 6 of previous cycles. Current data suggest we are entering the acceleration phase of this dynamic today. The explosive move in silver is not an isolated trading event. It is a symptom of a global realization that the debt loads of modern Western nations are mathematically unpayable in real terms. Central banks have been forced to choose between crashing the economy or inflating away the debt, and history shows they always choose inflation. The physical silver market is currently flashing warning signs that the paper price has been suppressing reality for too long. Inventories at major exchanges have been drawing down, while industrial demand for solar panels and electronics continues to climb. We are seeing a divergence between the paper silver traded on futures markets and the physical metal available for delivery. When this mechanism breaks, the price discovery moves from the leverage of the derivatives market to the scarcity of the physical market. Some economic historians note that silver is historically volatile and that rallies often fail. They argue that industrial demand can be substituted, or that monetary tightening can crush asset prices. This is a valid observation in a normal business cycle. However, under the current constraints, the central banks cannot tighten sufficiently to quell inflation without causing a sovereign debt crisis. The interest payments on the national debt would consume the entire tax revenue. Therefore, the rational move for the state is to allow inflation to run hot. In this environment, the volatility of silver is not a bug. It is the mechanism by which it reprices to reflect the true quantity of fiat currency in the system. History offers us 3 potential endgames for how this resolves. The first is a controlled decline, similar to the British experience of the 1970s. In this scenario, the currency loses value consistently over a decade, living standards slowly erode, and hard assets perform well as a hedge, but society manages to avoid total anarchy. The second endgame is a chaotic collapse, similar to Weimar Germany or the Roman crisis. Here, confidence evaporates overnight, the currency goes to zero, and the supply chain breaks down completely. This leads to massive social unrest and a total wipeout of the middle class. The third endgame is a reset and restructure, similar to the Bretton Woods Agreement of 1944 or the Nixon shock of 1971. In this scenario, governments acknowledge the failure of the current system and introduce a new monetary standard, possibly pegged to a basket of commodities or a new digital unit. In every one of these historical resets, Those holding paper promises took a haircut, while those holding physical assets carried their wealth through to the other side. The only variable is timing and pain. If you want to understand how to navigate this transition, you must educate yourself on monetary history and focus on resilience. Subscribe to this channel for continued analysis of these macro trends. Pay attention to the data, not the headlines.